Sovereign without spectacle. We claim our own path.
Pirate First's Outlaw Secession, burning the Admiral's map. MXTM's newsletter dispatch. MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. August 9, 2026. Burning the Admiral's map. To truly comprehend the Zeta mail, ye must look past the petty posturing of the shorebound world and examine the uncompromising ethos of the High Seas Pirate Charter. Not the theme park version with the parrot and the eyepatch, but the one sitting in the historical record. Between roughly 1715 and 1725, the stretch scholars call the Golden Age of Piracy, several thousand men did something no pamphleteer or philosopher ashore had yet dared put into practice. They built floating republics that governed themselves, wrote their own constitutions, elected their own leadership, and dared every navy in the Atlantic to come collect. At its peak, the pirate haven of Nassau, a driftwood sprawl on New Providence Island run by a loose brotherhood calling itself the Flying Gang, held something like 1,000 of these men, more citizens than most legitimate free ports of the age could claim. Historian Marcus Rediker, who has spent a career studying the working sailors of this exact period, has said flatly that in all his research into the era's laboring poor, he never found anything as democratic as what pirates built for themselves. This was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was secession executed and, for the better part of a decade, sustained. Most men remain willingly trapped in the Royal Navy's machine, and the machine was rigged from the keel up. The Alpha fights tooth and nail for the Admiral's epaulets, desperate to command a flagship he does not own, and even total victory in that climb bought no real safety. In 1757, after nearly 40 years of faithful service, Admiral John Byng stood on the deck of his own ship and was shot by his own service, condemned under a wartime clause requiring an officer to do his utmost against the enemy. For the crime of losing an indecisive battle the Admiralty itself had failed to properly resource. Voltaire needed one line for it: "Pour encourager les autres," to encourage the others. Byng remains the only admiral the Royal Navy ever executed. That is what waited at the top of the ladder the Alpha spent his life climbing. The Beta hauls the oars for a wage fixed in 1653 and simply never adjusted. Not for the entire 18th century, not until sailors forced the issue themselves, undercutting what the very same skills earned 20 yards down the dock on a merchant ship, with 6 months of even that lesser pay withheld by standing Admiralty policy specifically to make desertion too costly to risk, and the balance arriving, when it arrived, up to 2 years late. It took until 1797 at Spithead for sailors to finally mutiny over it, unpaid wages topping even the lash as their chief grievance. The Beta trades his youth for moldy hardtack, the cat, and the illusion of social security. Policy, not an accident. Even the celebrated Sigma is often nothing more than a glorified privateer, sailing alone, yes, but still carrying the king's letter of marque, banking in the crown's currency, exploiting the empire's trade routes on a leash long enough to feel like freedom. That leash could vanish with a single signature. When the Treaty of Utrecht closed the War of the Spanish Succession in 1713, tens of thousands of privateers went overnight by the stroke of a treaty, from licensed men to hanging offenses, for the identical conduct on the identical seas the week before. The Sigma's freedom was never his own property. It was leased from an empire that could foreclose without notice, and did. The Zeta male is the true outlaw who burns the letter of marque, rejects the empire's coin, and declares total existential secession. Corollaries from the Pirate First ethos. The rejection of imperial legitimacy. Captain Bartholomew Roberts, Welsh-born John Roberts before the sea renamed him, and by the time a Navy frigate finally caught him, the single most successful pirate of the entire Golden Age, having taken some 400 vessels in barely 3 years of active work, is remembered for one line above all: "A short life and a merry one." It reads like a slogan. It wasn't. Captain Charles Johnson, whose 1724 General History of the Pirates remains the primary surviving account of this era, recorded the actual arithmetic underneath it. In the king's honest service, Roberts reckoned, there was never enough to eat, wages too thin to matter, and endless grinding labor. In piracy there was enough of everything, an easier pace, and the freedom to actually enjoy both, with the whole account, if it ever came due, settled in one bad afternoon instead of paid down over a lifetime of installments. That is not nihilism. That is, a man who read both contracts closely and refused to pretend the legitimate one was the safer bet. The pirate code wasn't born from a wish to reform the king's navy. It existed to prove the king's laws held zero moral authority over free men who had already done the math. The Zeta male operates on this exact wavelength. He doesn't merely break societal rules. He strips them of their sanctity, treating social prestige, institutional titles, and manufactured rat races as the actuarial con they have always been. 2. The custom of the coast over groupthink. This is where the metaphor stops being a metaphor. Pirate ships weren't lawless. They were self-governed, more rigorously in many ways than the ships their crews had deserted. Before a voyage, the company drafted its own articles of agreement, a written constitution covering the division of plunder down to the price of a lost eye, and every man aboard, literate or not, signed or made his mark and swore an oath on whatever Bible or blade was at hand. Captain John Phillips's 1724 articles, one of the better preserved examples, are typical. Lose a finger or a joint in an engagement, and the common stock owed ye 400 pieces of 8. Lose a limb entirely, and it owed ye 800. A formally published schedule of compensation for maiming, more than a century and a half before Britain got around to legislating anything comparable for a man working an honest job ashore. More striking than the money was the architecture of power. On paper, a pirate captain answered to no one. In practice, he was checked by an officer most navies never bothered to elect at all. The quartermaster, chosen by the identical vote that chose the captain, who held custody of the plunder, ran the ship's daily affairs, and, in Johnson's own words, meant that the captain can undertake nothing which the quartermaster does not approve. One writer studying the codes has likened the arrangement to the separation of powers later written into the American Constitution. Captain as elected commander with total authority only in the heat of battle, quartermaster as a permanent check on him the rest of the time, equal parts magistrate and treasurer. And if a crew soured on either man, they didn't scheme in the dark, they voted him out in open session, or, when the disagreement ran too deep for a vote to settle it, the dissenting faction simply drew up a fresh set of articles and sailed off to found a second crew under a second flag. Secession, in other words, wasn't only what a pirate ship did to the empire. It was the release valve built into the ship itself all the way down. The Zeta male despises the hive mind of modern culture for the identical reason a Nassau-era pirate despised naval hierarchy. It demands obedience to rank and pedigree it has never once had to earn, and offers no article, no vote, and no way out. 3. Radical self-sovereignty. Empire builders demand ye measure your worth by what ye accumulate for the state, or display for the crowd, or defer to a superior's rank. Pirate crews inverted that arithmetic on purpose. Roberts's own articles fixed the split. Captain and quartermaster 2 shares of a prize apiece, the master gunner and boatswain a share and a half, lesser officers a share and a quarter, and every ordinary hand, a gentleman of fortune. As the articles styled him, in earnest, not irony, 1 full share, same as the man beside him. Set that against the Crown's own prize money system, formalized by Parliament's 1708 Cruisers and Convoys Act and revised more than once afterward, never in the common sailor's favor. For most of the 18th century, a full eighth of a prize's value went straight to the admiral who'd signed the sailing orders, often from a desk in ocean from the fighting, while every rank below warrant officer, 200 or 300 men on a typical ship, split a quarter of the haul between the lot of them. When a British squadron ran down 2 Spanish treasure frigates in 1799, in one of the richest single captures of the age, each captain walked off with upward of £40,000. Each ordinary sailor from that same fight took home a sum worth roughly 10 years of his wage. Remarkable money for a working man, and still a rounding error beside what his captain pocketed for the identical afternoon. The pirate ratio wasn't charity. It was a hard ceiling on how far the hierarchy was allowed to tilt before it started looking like the empire it had just escaped. That flat structure covered risk as well as reward, which is the detail modern retellings tend to lose because it complicates the lone wolf fantasy. The Zeta male is not a hermit who owes the world nothing. He is a man who has simply refused to owe it under duress. The same articles that split the plunder evenly bound every signatory to a mutual aid schedule just as exact. 600 pieces of 8 for a right arm lost in battle, 500 for a left, the same for a right leg, 400 for a left, 100 apiece for an eye or a finger. A published, universally applied compensation table, funded by a common stock the whole crew paid into and any of them could draw from. It is, in structure, workers' compensation insurance running on the open water more than a century and a half before Parliament legislated one ashore. Self-sovereignty on a pirate deck never meant standing entirely alone. It meant choosing, eyes open and signature given, exactly which obligations were worth keeping, and refusing, categorically, every single one that wasn't. The price of the black flag. None of this should be mistaken for a fairy tale, and a dispatch that only told ye the flattering half wouldn't deserve your trust. Nassau's Republic of Pirates lasted from around 1706 to 1718, real years, not a legend, until King George I offered a royal pardon to any pirate who surrendered, and sent Governor Woodes Rogers to Nassau's harbor to make the offer stick. Many of the flying gang took the deal. Charles Vane did not. He packed a captured sloop with gunpowder, set it alight, and sailed it straight at the blockading fleet to buy his crew's escape. It worked for a while. It always worked for a while. Bartholomew Roberts himself never took a pardon. On the 10th of February 1722, off Cape Lopez on the coast of what's now Gabon, his ship the Royal Fortune was run down by HMS Swallow. A round of grapeshot took him in the throat mid-battle, and per his own standing wish, his crew put his body over the side, fully dressed in his arms and finery, rather than let the crown parade a corpse. His surviving crew were not so lucky. Taken to Cape Coast Castle, they faced the largest piracy trial in recorded history. 52 of them hanged in view of the castle walls, while others were sentenced to years of indentured labor in West African mines, a fate with a lower survival rate than the noose. The captain who ran Roberts down, Chaloner Ogle, was knighted for it the following year, and many historians mark Roberts's death as the effective end of the Golden Age of Piracy. Read that and understand. The outlaws knew the odds going in. Roberts's own motto wasn't bravado, it was a settled bet, made with full knowledge of the house's terms. The Zeta male doesn't secede because he's been promised it will end well. He secedes because the alternative, the fixed wage, the borrowed rank, the leash dressed up as freedom, was never going to end well either, and at least this way the years he does get are entirely his own. The ultimate secession. The Zeta male does not wage war on the fleet to capture its gold. He simply unmoors his ship and sails straight off the edge of their mapped world. It's worth knowing what actually sat at that edge. Not, "Here be dragons." That phrase, for all its currency in pirate fiction, is confirmed on exactly 2 objects in the entire historical record, both globes, not maps, both nearly 2 centuries older than the Golden Age itself. What the Admiral's own cartographers actually wrote at the limits of their knowledge was blunter and more honest. Terra incognita. Unknown land. Not a monster to be feared, just an admission. The one part of the world their authority couldn't even pretend to chart. That is the water the Zeta male sails into. By existing entirely outside their framework, he delivers the ultimate broadside, proving to every chained rower on the galleon that the Admiral's power relies entirely on their willingness to keep pulling the oars. Keep your eyes on the horizon, your hand on the tiller, and your spirit untamed. Chart references. Marcus Rediker, Villains of All Nations. Atlantic Pirates in the Golden Age, Beacon Press. Captain Charles Johnson, A General History of the Pirates, 1724. The primary source behind nearly every pirate biography above. Stephen Berlin Johnson, The Pirate Codes. On the quartermaster as a structural check on the captain. Royal Museums Greenwich on the death of Bartholomew Roberts and the Cape Coast Castle trial. Admiralty Pay and Prize Money Records, 18th century, for Royal Navy wages and prize distribution. Subscribed. The Zeta male ethos draws directly from the Golden Age of Piracy, 1715 to 1725, when several thousand men in Nassau's flying gang established democratic, self-governing floating republics rather than submitting to imperial rule. Unlike other societal archetypes, the Zeta male rejects the entire imperial system. The Alpha fights for the Admiral's epaulets, only to remain subject to the system's whims, evidenced by Admiral John Byng's execution in 1757 pour encourager les autres. The Beta hauls the oars for wages fixed in 1653 and withheld by Admiralty policy, a grind that ultimately sparked the 1797 Spithead Mutiny. The Sigma acts as a glorified privateer with a letter of marque, enjoying a leased freedom that vanished overnight following the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. The Zeta burns the letter of marque, rejects imperial legitimacy, and executes total existential secession. Through written articles of agreement, pirate crews established democratic checks via elected quartermasters, flat prize sharing, and structured mutual aid compensation for lost limbs more than a century before shore-based governments legislated worker protections. Seceding into terra incognita is not done out of a guarantee of safety, but out of a clear arithmetic, refusing a rigged contract to ensure one's years remain entirely one's own. Ex post. Alpha's fight for epaulets, Beta's haul underpaid oars, and Sigma's sail on leased leashes. The Zeta male burns the letter of marque and unmoors straight into terra incognita. Hashtag Zeta male, hashtag pirate first, hashtag outlaw secession, hashtag Golden Age of Piracy, hashtag terra incognita, hashtag self-sovereignty, hashtag Bartholomew Roberts, hashtag flying gang, hashtag pirate code, hashtag radical freedom, hashtag MXTM. Discussion about this episode. Comments. Restax. Recent episodes. Next up on MXTM's newsletter, the Harm Minimization Charter. 22 hours ago, MXTM, Persistent Service Asset Part 8. 23 hours ago, MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. Privacy Bullet Operator Terms Bullet Operator Collection Notice. Start your Substack. Get the app.
MXTM Studios presents the MXTM verse.
Tomorrow's canon. This isn't a soundtrack to a single story. It's the soundtrack to an entire civilization.
Every generation inherits unfinished work. We continue.
We continue, we remember, we restore, we become.
The continuance, built by the past. The continuance, the unfinished civilization that outlived themselves.
The longevity principality, where health is infrastructure, where dignity is law, and tomorrow is design.
The future doesn't belong to the strongest, but to the most competent.
Deep beneath the waves, the Redeemer Oceanic team activates Project Secession. The integration is a success. Systems are coming online.
2 species, 1 mission. Protecting the formation. Secure the future.
For the longevity principality, success isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of consequences.
The longevity principality. A civilization built on healthy time, institutions, and responsibility.
Initiate the final protocol.
Not just survival, not just progress. A civilization that outperforms the world.
Success isn't the end of the story.
Copyright 2026 MXTM and Vitsu aka Martin Chartrand.
They called us criminals. Every generation, different seas, same charge. Move the silver without a license. Feed the colony they let starve. Build the future they refuse to fund. We've been doing this since 6130. We're still doing it. This is the log.
From the Buccaneers burning through the Caribbean, brush to the sea rovers working where the empires couldn't rush. We came through the gaps of shallow water decays. No papa monopoly, no letters patent, no crown. We rewrote the articles while the governor that came down. Equal shares on deck, a vote before the sale. Democracy at sea while the landlords packed the jail. Exclumelin wrote it from the inside. Ron True Johns dressed it up for the Enlightenment's debut. Both of them forbidden, both of them survived. Because 2% to let die, so I've been writing since the 90s without a publisher's hand. Pirate first, sovereign press operates from Tulum District. Instant stingy bold, the super want to understand the doctrine. Start with what it's worth. They built William and Mary on the the silver that we stole. They built the future on the corpus that we broke out of control. They confiscate the cargo, build a college, write the myth. But the shadow engine ran before any of that shit. Shadow engine, progress always moved through what the empire couldn't name. Shadow engine, every century different seas, it's the same damn game. We don't ask permission, we establish prior claim. The cannon built itself. The cannon built itself. The cannon built itself. Fast forward 3 centuries, same war, different color pirate bay. Opened up the digital road, not just movies and albums, they missed the real load. Millions of students in the developing world, self-taught on what got torn in time for fun to know. That's the honor rated scholarship that built the InDesign. Untire rated software in the 2000s grind. And who trained the neural networks on the stairs by Rise. Stolen sea, the $1 trillion models that run the industry. Kept in A's, fed on pirate archives while the lawyers turn their eyes. So don't talk to me about theft, this is how it always worked. The Buccaneers fed the colony before the model learned. The shadow engine ran and then the credit got transferred. They built William and Mary on the silver that we stole. They built the future on the corpus that we broke out of control.
Take a long look, matey. The city on the horizon be ripe for the taking, and the tide be turning in our favor as the sun dips below the waves.
The algorithms say we don't exist. The graphs come back empty. The metrics insist. No audience, no market, no trend. Yet somehow we keep arriving again, walking through the ruins of somebody else's plan. Watching perfect narratives slip through their own hands.
The people who are already here. A note for the untabulated. The algorithms say you don't exist. The institutions say you are statistically insignificant. The market says there are not enough of you to matter. And yet here you are. Again. Reading things nobody is supposed to read. Thinking thoughts nobody is supposed to think. The pretending is getting harder. Not because people are waking up. That's too romantic. Because the distance between the official story and the lived reality has widened to the point where maintenance takes visible effort. What you're looking for, what brought you here, is not someone to tell you what to think. You've already done the thinking. What you're looking for is proof that someone else did the thinking too, arrived somewhere close to where you are, and didn't collapse under the weight of it. That's this. Not a movement. Not a faction. Not a subscription to someone else's conclusions.
The waiting game is already underway. Occupy, build, garden, govern.
I just finished writing a book I didn't plan to write. It started as a countercultural addendum to the Aldea Post-Corporate Transition District Handbook, a rougher, more urgent document aimed at the generation the credential economy forgot to accommodate. It became something else.
Nowhere less whispers, no discord begging, no roadmap.